Hello and welcome to Comics Corner with me, your host, Connor Knowlan. Over the course of the show tonight, you're going to learn all about one of the things I love most in the world, comics. Now sit back, relax, and get ready for the show. Or, well, in this case, the comics. Alright everybody, I'm really excited for this. This is the very first installment of Comics Corner with Connor Knowlan. And today we are going to tackle one of the most interesting stories in the last decade, in my opinion. That's right, folks. We're going to be jumping into the Spider-Verse. Written in 2014 by Dan Slott, published by Marvel. One other thing to keep in note, it did spawn the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, and also a direct sequel, Spider-Geddon, in 2018. Now, to get into some of the nitty-gritties, the main characters that are focused on in this story are Spider-Man, Peter Parker, from Earth 616, which is the main Marvel continuity. His powers include superhuman strength, speed, reflexes, agility, coordination, and balance. He can also cling to any solid surfaces. He's got accelerated healing, genius level intellect, and he's got a very interesting power called the Spider Sense, which is a little danger sense, so he can kind of just dip and dodge out of the way from any attack. The next major character we need to talk about is the Superior Spider-Man, who is technically Dr. Otto Octavius from Earth 616, but in this story, it's Dr. Otto Octavius in the body of Peter Parker. In a different story, Doc Ock took over Spider-Man's body and became Spider-Man. So his powers are basically the same as Peter Parker's. The only major difference is the suit. It's got a couple little upgrades, such as retractable legs. The next major character we need to talk about is Silk, who is Cindy Moon from Earth 616. She was also bitten by the radioactive spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. Her powers include superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, and endurance. She also has a long-range precognitive spider sense, an eidetic memory, and she's able to cling to almost anything, and can shoot spider webs from her own body. Alright, the next character that we're going to move on to is one of my favorite, and that is Kane. He is Kane Parker from Earth 616, and he is a clone of Peter Parker that's stuck around since the 1990s in that Clone Saga. So his powers include enhanced strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, equilibrium, and reflexes. He can also generate organic web-like strings from his wrists. He's got enhanced night vision, an enhanced healing factor. He's got the Mark of Cain, where he uses his ability to cling to walls to attack his attacker. Also at this time, he's got the powers of the Other, a storyline that had happened a couple of years previously, and because of that he can retract stingers out of his forearms. That's also what gives him the ability to shoot webs out of his own body. Alright, now we're going to move on to a fan favorite, Ultimate Spider-Man, also known as Miles Morales from Earth 1610, which is an alternate universe Spider-Man, one of the most popular Spider-Man in all Spider-Man history. His powers include superhuman strength, speed, agility, the ability to cling to solid surfaces, camouflage, which is one of my favorite abilities that he has. He can literally go invisible. It is so useful. So beautiful. Another great ability he has is the Venom Blast, when he can use his own bioelectric energy to shock his opponent. He's also got Spider Sense, he's got resistance to injury, and he's got web shooters. And the last major character, well in this case characters that I'm going to cover, is the Inheritors. They are the big bad of this story. They are a family of psychic vampires who eat animal totems in order to live. An animal totem is something that had been set up in a previous spider story, but basically, if you are a spider character in the Marvel Comics universe, you are an animal totem. So, the inheritors are bad news. One of the most famous inheritors is Morlun, or Morlun, however you want to pronounce it, but, big bad. Most of them, this is the powers that most of them have. Superhuman strength, durability, enhanced speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, and extended longevity. Another thing to mention, well, we'll mention that later. But they got another trick up their sleeve. Alright, everybody, let's get into the plot. So, we open up in the Globe Theater. And I know what you're thinking. Why we at the Globe Theater? Well, one of the alternate versions of Spider-Man lives in the 1602 universe, which is basically what if Marvel happened in 1602. And this Spider-Man, is a performer, he's doing his little bit, and then he notices Morlun. And he's like, yo, we need to, back out of here, everybody get out. And he tries to protect his love. But Morlun wins the fight. Let's just go with that, because I want to keep it kind of PG, and eats the spider totem that's connected to that Spider-Man. And then we switch to Superior Spider-Man, which, like I said earlier, Doc Ock's brain in Spider-Man's body. And in the Superior Spider-Man line, Doc Ock blipped through time for a second. And in that blip, he was sent to 2099, where he met up with that Spider-Man's brother. And he's running around collecting all this stuff to build a time portal. He builds a time portal. He goes back to what you think is his time, but it's actually an alternate version of Earth, where the Spider-Man of that world is killed. He was also, by the by, part of that world's Fantastic Four, which was actually the Fantastic Five. But, either way, he's dead. So, Superior Spider-Man figures out that it is a dimension-hopping device and not a time travel device. So he's hopping around from world to world, trying to collect Spider-Mans, what's going on? He picks up another Spider-Man, and introduces him to his team. And, we get a little backstory on a couple of them. We get a little backstory on the Inheritors. Not something I want to go super into detail about. Then we go over to our Spider-Man, 616 Spider-Man. Spider-Man's meets up with Silk, swinging around the city. He meets Spider-Woman, he meets Spider-Girl, and then all of these other Spider characters just start popping up, and he's like, what's going on, guys? This is kind of my home turf. There's no reason for everybody to start jumping in. But then they're like, yo, this is what's happening. They go to an Earth where Peter Parker had and kept the powers of Captain Universe. Side note, Captain Universe is one of the most powerful entities in Marvel history. Super strength, cosmic awareness, yada yada yada, super big. They figured, because they are on that world, they're safe. Well, I'm not gonna say, I don't want to spoil anything just yet, but I really should have thought it through more. So then they spend some time jumping around from universe to universe, picking up some spider people. Then they meet up with Doc Ock's spider team. And Doc Ock is like, oh, this is the Peter Parker. He doesn't know that it's me. He's gonna think I'm just acting differently. Like, he's gonna think that I'm him, and, he's from before I switch, so I just gotta play it cool. Now, this Spider-Man, 616 Spider-Man, already defeated Doc Ock in the Superior Spider-Man story, so he knows that Doc Ock is in control of that body right now. So, they work together. Then they learn about the prophecy of the Other, who is Kane, the Bride, who is Silk, and the Scion, which is Benji Parker, who is the younger brother of Spider-Girl of an alternate Earth. And they have to protect these three from getting attacked by the Inheritors. So, they put 616 Spider-Man in charge of their forces. But Otto's like, no. I'm going to be in charge. And because of the time travel aspect, 616 Spider-Man is like, I can't tell him that I know that he's him. Otherwise, he'll know that he loses, and it's going to set off a whole chain of events. And then there's, a couple other things happen, but then there's a fight between the two of them. 616 Spider-Man wins, tells Otto that he knows that he's Otto, and takes command. Then they kill an Inheritor. But a little bit later, that Inheritor comes back. And Kane immediately thinks he's a clone. So Kane, a Ben Reilly of an alternate Earth, and Black Widow of Earth 1610 go off to destroy the cloning world. Really great, interesting tie-in story. Really beautiful. Needless to say, they succeed. They cut off the Inheritor's way to clone and come back, but Ben Reilly dies in the process. And that sets Kane off. Straight up sets him off. So he goes charging in to the Inheritor's home world. Which is bad because Kane is the Other of the prophecy. Then we switch back over to the main force, and Silk, something that you guys need to know about Silk is she spent most of her life in a bunker. After she was bitten by the spider, she was sent into a bunker. So she's kind of childish, and she thinks that everybody's treating her like a child. But because she is the bride of the prophecy, people don't want her to get injured or hurt or captured. But because she tends to lash out, she goes charging off to the Inheritors world. And then the Inheritors also end up capturing Benji. So they have the Other. The Other went there. They've captured the Scion, and the Bride charged in to the Inheritor world. So things are looking kind of bad. But there's an all-out break for the Inheritor world. And it turns out that the Spider-Woman of that world is the first servant to the Inheritor. So the main universe's Spider-Woman swaps places with her so that they can infiltrate. There's a big climactic battle. People are getting killed off right and left. And then they remember something. We got to throw it back to That's something else. There is one world that the inheritors wouldn't fight against. And it only had one inhabitant, and that was the spider person, because the whole world was covered in nuclear fallout. So, the inheritors don't want to go there. So, after the inheritors are defeated, they round them all up and throw them into that world so that they are kept in place and they can't jump from world to world. So, we're moving up to the wrap-up part of the story, and, a lot of spiders died, really sad, but all of the other spiders learned from it and know how to defeat the inheritors. Cain goes off and does his thing. There is an multiversal group of spider people that are going to patrol basically the Spider-Verse, actually the multiverse. The Spider-Man of the radiated world is actually Ben Parker. And in the beginning of Spider-Verse, when Benji was captured, the Peter Parker of that world was killed. So, Ben Parker of the radiated world goes back and lives with Benji and Spider-Girl. And then we switch back to Spider-Man, and he's thinking back on what happened, and it's a little crazy, But, he goes back to his normal everyday life. Well, as normal as you can be if you're Spider-Man. Miles Morales goes back to 1610. They start the Spider Corps. One last really important thing that we gotta mention is that Superior Spider-Man had to have his memory wiped, because if he didn't have it wiped, he would know that he lost, and he would try to fix it so that he didn't lose, which would then destroy 616 Spider-Man. But, everything ends up happening for a reason. We get a little new status quo for each of the Spider characters. Really interesting. Because they didn't kill off the inheritors, that's why we were able to set up for Spider-Geddon. And one other thing we didn't talk about was the Master Weaver, who was a spider person of the Inheritor world that weaved the Master Web, and saw everything that was happening. He was killed halfway through the story, which is really bad because, nobody's going to be able to look out for the multiverse now. But one of the inheritors, Karn, was actually trying to help the spiders. So he decided to volunteer to become the new Master Weaver so that he could help all spiders throughout the entire multiverse. Yeah, pretty good story. Yeah, it's pretty good. Alright, now we're going to talk about fan reception. For the most part, fans liked the story. There were a couple complaints. Couple like, did that really need to happen moments? But for the most part, people loved it, won a couple of awards, and it also spawned a direct comic sequel in Spider-Geddon, and it inspired a feature-length film in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, hopefully I've done my job well and you guys want to buy it. So, you can pick this great comic up at Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, any local comic book store. It's a great story. You guys really should check it out. Now we're going to move on to something that I wasn't sure if I wanted to do when I came up with this idea, but I'm going to give the comic a rating out of 1 to 10. 1 being I hated it, 10 being I can't put it down. And for Spider-Verse, I'm going to give it an 8. Love Spider-Man. I love seeing alternate versions of Spider-Man, Spider-Women, All of it. Love spiders and Marvels. Literally one of my most favorite superheroes of all time. The reason I gave it an 8 is because there were a couple plot convenient points, but overall, it's a great story. Have a big, thick trade back at my house. It's a beautiful story. You guys should definitely check it out. Thanks so much for listening to Comics Corner with me, Connor Knowlan. If you like what you heard today, why don't you tell your friends about it and share it all around? And if you have any suggestions for what comics should be next on the show, leave a comment down below. And remember, comics are king.